1996's Scream, directed by the horror legend Wes Craven and written by teen drama legend Kevin Williamson, is without question one of the best horror films ever. It's high energy, quippy, clever, and occasionally mean-spirited horror that remains captivating through endless rewatches. It gave us the all-timer Psycho-inspired horror opening, and it claimed the meta-horror crown at a time where subversion and self-reflection felt fresh. So how did we go from all of this to a seventh film that is so unaware of its original purpose that audiences are literally eye-rolling at its ghost face reveal? And what might have prevented this slow auto-cannibalization of Scream? Scream is perhaps best known as a meta-text deconstructing tropes of the slasher subgenre that populated the 80s and 90s. In making the first film, Craven and Williamson were drawing upon decades worth of existing material, which formed a well-established set of character archetypes, tropes, and failings. As explained in this 2005 paper by Valerie Wee, these conventions include a group of young, often teenage characters as potential victims, imperial, sexually attractive young women being stalked by a knife-wielding, virtually indestructible psychotic serial killer, and scenes of unexpected and shocking violence and brutality. The film both summarized and confirmed what a slasher was in literal terms by calling attention to these tropes. John Carpenter's Halloween especially is frequently discussed by characters, along with Craven's own A Nightmare on Elm Street and the Friday the 13th series. The slasher genre, as films near always do, reflected cultural concerns of the time, and in mimicking them, Scream also reflected these cultural concerns, such as anxieties around teen sexuality, family disrepair, suburban evil, and teen violence. But Scream the First serves to subvert these rather than just point them out, showing that a final girl, for instance, can have sex and survive. Worth saying, though, that it's unclear if this is the result of any intentional feminist dissemination. Wes Craven's films are brilliant, but plenty of them play a role in creating negative tropes too, like the Nightmare franchise's Virginal Final Girl and Last House on the Left's Vengeful Daddy. It's possible that rather than criticizing the notion that moralistic sexual purity keeps a woman safe, for instance, Craven and Williamson were instead exploiting the audience's familiarity with the trope just to keep them guessing. Whether intentional or not, though, the series provided steadfast and complex female leads that connected with a generation and generations to come of young women. As Carlin wrote for Genders magazine in 2003, the Scream trilogy enables girls to reject codes of femininity familiar to them from the highly conventionalized genre of the teen slasher film in order to rewrite them in more empowering ways. Sydney, Gale, Tatum, all these characters were sharp, resourceful, funny, and feisty in ways women so often weren't in slasher films. Also, Dewey is like the best male role model of this era. Gentle lover boy who lives for his bitchy diva and isn't afraid to show emotions. All these characters are just so good and so much more fleshed out and charismatic than audiences had come to expect from horror. Scream came at this perfect time in 1996, where the genre had exhausted itself and was almost a closed book. But studio interest in teen audiences was spiking. The duo recognized that audiences had grown cynical and overfamiliar and were smart enough to need more. And they masterfully brought together a plethora of existing reference points that do more than just acknowledging that other horror films exist. We all remember lines like, "Let's face it, Sid, your mom's no Sharon Stone," because of how intrinsically they linked to the actual story. We get chills as Sydney decides to lay it all out for Billy because we know it might doom her. In treating their audience as worthy and intelligent, their meta-innovations reinvigorated a genre when it had fallen somewhat out of favor and was apt to be both critiqued and re-enjoyed. And so Scream was a major box office success. But of course, with that success comes the curse of 1,000 sequels. The pricks of many... The 1,000 The 1,000 pricks? What am I talking about? But before we get stuck into those prequels, I want to talk to you first about today's amazing sponsor, Milanote. Oh, hi. Milanote is a creative organization tool, and if you're familiar with my channel, you'll know I often use it for planning videos, fashion mood boarding, and travel planning. So let me take you through the process for this very video. To begin prepping, I'm going to make a new board where you can add all sorts of things from this sidebar like YouTube clips, site links, and documents. The first thing I want to do is get my posters in. Just by dragging and dropping the images, then I'm going to use the spreadsheet function to lay out some basic info at a glance. I'm also figuring out my color palette for this edit, which as always is in the theme of the video topic. I like that this has picked the blue-gray straight up from the images on the board if you're just looking for inspiration, but I'm gonna pick my other colors specifically. Now, down here, I'm starting a research document. And because I've had help again from the wonderful Charlotte, I can add her as a contributor. There are a myriad of options for collaboration, from allowing comments to full editing of the board. And then you'll see later on, she's done all of this amazing research I can keep here in one place. Having read through it, I've pulled some of those articles she referenced straight onto the board using Milanote's web clipper that I have installed in my browser. On any site, I can just click this and it'll send the link back to my Milanote board to arrange later. The next stage in my process is gathering my most basic thoughts. Now I've done some exploring. So I'm just writing up a quick note here of my initial ideas. And with that side of things complete, I'm going to start a new subboard for my actual production planning. If I was working on a bigger project, like a short film, I might go for something like this. And there are 100+ other templates to suit every kind of creative project. But I'm happy with a blank one because I know I only need a few things. So you can see I'm using the tickable to-do list function, as well as another grid to track my due dates. And the good thing here is once I've made this, I can just duplicate it and copy and paste it into other projects. Milanote can be used via the web or on the app, so you can update it anytime, anywhere. And if all of that sounds like something that you need for your next creative project, you can try Milanote for free with no time limit. So sign up now by just clicking the link in my description and get started on your next creative project. Gonna edit in a cool slash, unless I don't feel like it. Every single film in this franchise could have a whole dissection to itself, but I do not have half a year to work on that, so I'm really summarizing the broad progression and intention of this series. Craven and Williamson reunited for Scream 2 1997. It's a fun, twisty little movie that reunites us with almost everyone we love. It calls to attention tropes that weren't dealt with in the first film, such as exclusion of black characters. Though I have to say, killing Jada Pinkett Smith moments after she monologues about this very thing in a film with barely any other black characters is hardly the handling this actually needed. But the main idea at play here is that the sequel is about sequels. Which does make sense. Reflecting on sequels still had metatextual significance, as We 2005 explains. Teen slasher films also originated the trend towards spin-offs, sequels, and imitators, sparking a rush of successful slasher film franchises. With the release of each installment in the series, the conventions of the genre were repeated and consolidated. But I actually think it is this early with Scream 2 that things go awry. With the introduction of Stab, the in-film version of Scream that is made in Scream after Gale writes a book about the events of the first film. An idea perfect for a 3-movie metatext that instead became a detriment to a much longer franchise. 2000's Scream 3, which swapped out Williamson for new writer Erin Kruger, is literally on the Stab movie set, and it makes victims of the original characters parallel performers, one of them being 90s Parker Posey, who is always a delight to watch. Lorazepam, Tsunami. Oh my god, I also forgot Gale's accursed fringe. I once bleached my hair and was given one of these little fringes by God in the process, which was an extremely dire outcome for someone with my self-confidence. But on installments 2 and 3, the films went a layer deeper in their meta-narrative to look at how audiences interact with the media. There are definitely issues people have with these films, especially the third one, like Sydney's ghost mum, the voice changer, and Roman Bridger retconning Billy's motive, but all in all, it's a beloved trilogy, and perhaps that's where it should have ended. Interestingly, the release of parody movie Scary Movie in the year 2000, the same year that the third film came out, marked the same exhaustion with meta-horror that Scream had once marked for slashers. The 2000s were on the brink of ushering in one of my favourite subgenres, torture porn, and so Scream was left to lie for 11 long years. Enter stage left Scream 4, where Craven and Williamson reunite. Scream 4 is no doubt another enjoyable entry that can be watched through the rose-tinted glasses of nostalgia. It has a Culkin, a Scream Queen, a Legacy Link, and plenty of goopy violence. But it unquestionably flounders in adapting to a 2010s teen world. In the 90s, Williamson was a cutting-edge writer of teenagers, but it's not surprising he couldn't uphold that, given that he wrote this when he was in his 40s. The dialogue itself isn't terrible at all, but much of the film hinges on the character Robbie live streaming everything from a huge head camera, which was weirdly both kind of ahead of its time and completely unsuccessful at capturing the way young people used technology. And this bizarre fixation on tech as an important part of Scream is something Williamson continues to pursue when he picks the series back up for the 7th film. Wes Craven sadly passed away a few years after Scream 4's release, and Williamson stated that he didn't want to make any more Scream films without him. But the hungry hippos at the Weinstein Company, because yes, this was a Weinstein franchise, wanted more. However, with Harvey Weinstein's demise leaving the company in limbo, Scream was acquired by Spyglass Media Group, and a 5th film was handed to Matt Bettinelli-Olpin and Tyler Gillett of Radio Silence, off the back of their smash hit, Ready or Not. After another 11-year gap, the 5th film matched the premise of the 4th. A new group of teens combined with original characters we love. And like the sequel-focused narratives of 2 and 3, 5 focuses on the idea of reboots and requels, the name given to the hybrid remake sequels which have populated the 2010s and 20s. And yes, this is a real thing that is happening, was happening, is still happening in the horror genre and film on a whole. But I feel this real-world context narrative had really run its course in the first 3 films. When you listen to the list of horror rules, it's no longer Randy's have sex and you die list about the tropes of slashers. It's Mindy's legacy characters don't die list about the tropes of requels. That's the difference. Slasher tropes versus sequel tropes. Within context, film tropes versus filmmaking tropes. In this new Scream, they confirm that the franchise's meta-purpose is no longer to reflect tropes of horror, but tropes of franchises. Sure, they throw in an early mention of elevated horror and the Babadook to remind us this is a new Scream for a new age, though it doesn't actually draw from any of these films beyond that verbal reference. And make no mistake, I love 5 Cream, which is 100% what this film should have been called. Its main thread of reigniting a franchise is done well and they have fun with it, drawing attention to legacy characters, attempting commentary on fan relationships with media, and how eager audiences are to correct and criticize their beloved media's makers. It works because it is 1, a true reflection of the modern landscape, and 2, supported by an extremely charismatic cast and really refined horror filmmaking. Scream 6 disappointed me a little, as it opts against using the fresh start to gain distance from the original films, and sticks even closer to its formula by having a ghost face reveal that is a direct equivalent to Scream 2. But again, the film is still really successful as a peppy, gory popcorn horror. It also has no Sydney appearances, which worked for me. As my patron Eolie Alia put it, I was all for moving away from Sydney and Woodsboro, and having a new final girl to focus on was such a breath of fresh air. Part of the catharsis in the endings was that they were survivors. One of the main reasons I stayed so invested in Scream 6 is because Sam Carpenter might genuinely be my favourite final girl. She really feels like a real person. She's protective, can be reactive, is not always super likeable, but loves people deeply. She's vicious and unafraid of conflict while being emotionally vulnerable. Controversially, I also actually like the Billy is her dad backstory and the connection that that gives her to this rage and vengeance. I'm sad we didn't get the full circle of a lead character becoming the final Ghostface. A literal live long enough to become the villain arc would have been such a cool place to finish the franchise, and equally metatextual in a world of requels that never end. But sadly, Sam Carpenter's story was cut short just as it was peaking. I'm not going to get too into this because I want to stick to the content of the films themselves as their weak point. But as most of you know, Melissa Barrera was fired after showing public support for Palestine. While the Radio Silence team had left for ambiguous reasons already, newly slated director Christopher Landon and Jenna Ortega both left shortly after Barrera's public dismissal. Dissecting that situation is not the purpose of this video, but it has affected my want to support this franchise. And when Scream 7 was rolled out earlier this year, I declined to promote it and did not pay money to see it. And when I did finally see it a few months ago, I was genuinely gagged by how awful it was. And while we're down here, if you're enjoying this video, please leave a comment and a like. This is a huge help to me as it tells YouTube that the video is worth seeing, and then it gets shared with more people. And if you want to see more from me, please subscribe below. I have a lot of issues with Scream 7. We have an extremely lackluster new lead in Sydney's daughter, who, without directly insulting the actress, is the most unengaging and hollow character I've encountered in this franchise. It's obviously extremely difficult to step in and replace someone like Jenna Ortega, who has such a specific and beloved energy, but this was a horrible miscast in my eyes. I just didn't get it. Same goes for the new cast of youngins. They have zero chemistry and zero pizzazz in how they're characterized. The recognizable Radio Silence spark is nowhere to be found, to the point that it's almost jarring when Chad and Mindy appear. And that is only the tip of the iceberg. Most disturbing Scream iceberg, tier list, ranked, disturbing. Williamson again puts his focus on what he seems to perceive is a prescient anxiety, technology, and it feels far too central to the story. I don't know about you, but when I think about what Scream does well, it's not a Black Mirror style tech takedown. Black Mirror doesn't even do that well anymore. When Ghostface used a voice modulator in the early films, it was just a tool in his anonymity. And I understand that the deepfakes here are also just a tool in his anonymity, but it plays out as a major focus of the film, which misses the point. How Ghostface becomes anonymous isn't scary. Just the fact that he is, and the mask does that job. The fundamentals of fear are all askew in this film. Perhaps they predicted when writing this that deepfakes would have grown to be a hot button issue, or perhaps there was just a fundamental misunderstanding from the mind of a 60-year-old about what frightens younger people and general audiences. But no one is particularly concerned about the impacts of deepfakes. Yes, they have been used in creating political misinformation and revenge horn, but the zillennial reception to this is not fearful. It's more annoyance and frustration than anything. It doesn't reflect life in the 2020s. And so this deepfake-driven mystery is the source of the single most embarrassing sequence in any Scream film, as Sydney is monologued to by a bunch of morphing cameos from a selection of past cast members. And when I say cameos, I mean like the app cameo. It genuinely looks here like Laurie Metcalf propped her phone up on her kitchen counter, read her lines, and returned it to the producers for a $10,000 check. I cannot believe anyone thought this worked. But amid all this, what I found most confounding about Scream 7 is its true inability to reflect on anything other than itself. By bringing back Sydney, they've written themselves into a box where only she can lead these films without another extremely jarring turn or multiple films in which they phase her out. I understand that Neve Campbell means a lot to people, but there are only so many motives to kill one person, and they've already run dry. Scream 7 culminates in such an irrelevant demasking scene. It had me doing the bemused head tilt of who the hell even is that, and the exasperated eye roll of, well, yeah, she constantly plays neurotic wackos and is the only character in this film who has no other reason to be there other than being the killer. Then the monologuing actually begins, and it feels even more nonsensical. You wanted to be like Sydney, so you killed your first husband, and then when she chose a quiet life, you decided to kill her for no longer being your girl boss baddie role model? Okay, queen. Binding Sydney to this key role limits where the franchise can or is willing to move. And it felt so flat listening to every character, particularly the teenagers, talk about her as if they are all hyper-informed and fixated on her past. We're at the point that Deepfake Stu says a line to Sydney that was said to her in the first film in front of nobody else. No one knew this was said to her, so it's only for the audience. Everything is a reference to a reference, all within this world of screams and stabs that is slowly caving in on itself as it becomes too abstract to hold any other meaning. The cameo scene mentioned before, with its multi-character morphing monologue, underpins this. I watched Scream 7 with a friend who had not seen the previous films, so he had absolutely no idea what was going on for most of the film, and literally no idea what was going on in this scene, because it doesn't function on its own. We're supposed to recognize all of these quotes and last names and relationship dynamics. Having the context is supposed to be the reward. But frankly, the context doesn't make it any more enjoyable either. It just makes Scream 7 feel stuck in the past. There are attempts to rewrite the formula, here with a bonus Ghostface who is run down by a car and killed in the first 30 minutes. But even rewriting the formula is the formula at this point, whether you work with it or against it. We know the bad boyfriend won't end up being bad. We know Stu will be a red herring. We know there's going to be multiple killers. This all feels predictable because it will go one of only two ways: to comply or subvert. And both ways are self-satisfactory pats on the back. This increasing reliance on self-referential and repetitive tropes was no doubt charted by previous entries, but for me, Scream has finally cannibalized itself to the point where there is nothing left to chew on. In the 7th film, they confirm that the franchise's purpose is no longer to reflect tropes of horror or real-life cultural concerns or tropes of franchises, but tropes of the Scream franchise only. This isn't a scream, it's an echo. So, how could this have been done better? I think in the desperation to mimic the first film, the Scream franchise loses its potential to be the commentary on the horror genre it could have been. As my patron Bob Fleck expressed, I think the series could have ended with the main trilogy and been an inspiration to try similar meta-commentary films with other subgenres of horror, ideally by the directors working at the heart of those subgenres, like Craven was for slashers. And Bob, I think you're onto something. In some ways, my dream for Scream is a franchise that continues to comment on the state of horror and its tropes, and drops the slasher framing to focus on contemporary horror. A film that actually draws from the conventions on display in films like The Babadook, Get Out, Hereditary, The Menu, Barbarian, X. effects. And trust, I'm aware that this is not a popular take in our little horror bubble, as Sydney and Ghostface are for most people what defines the series. My patrons, for instance, had this to say: "I love Ghostface and the killer's dumb, amateurish methods of chasing and killing. I love the reveals. I love the characters. I love Woodsboro. I love the increasingly insane and asinine ways the killers end up relating to the original events. I love Roger Jackson's Ghostface. I think Ghostface is essential to Scream, but is only compelling when the killer replicates Billy and Stu's horror fanaticism. The killer's motive to revitalize slasher films in the era of elevated horror stands on its own." I also understand that reflecting contemporary horror is much harder to do than it was in the 90s, because there are less concrete waves of subgenre popularity, and many new films are already engaged in self-aware subversion. There are far less recognizable rules, far less tropes that have emerged anew, which means there are less rules to either abide by or break. Just check the comments on my elevated horror video if you want to see people arguing over what elevated horror even means and whether it even exists. I did not realize how many people hated that subgenre label when I made that video, my lord. So there is hardly an agreed upon checklist of traits. But I see a trend in supernatural horror over the last 15 years, and non-slasher psychological horrors with human villains. We also have some new tropes, like films ending with a woman manically smiling and possibly covered in blood. Twists have become almost demanded in horror. Trauma has undoubtedly been a major through line of 2010s and 2020s horror, to the point that people are begging for less of it. I have a dream of a Scream franchise that moved on from Ghostface and gave us a blue-hued critique of trauma-based elevated horror, or a film that plays with the more abstract elements of modern horrors like last year's Weapons and Sinners. Something colourful and bombastic and unpredictable. Would it still feel like a Scream film? No, I can't pretend that it would feel anything like what we've come to know and love. But could it have worked if these ideas were integrated throughout the series to reflect trends? Just about maybe. I can't pretend I could write it, but maybe someone could. Unless you're an executive producer of Scream watching this video, in which case I could definitely write it, and my contact details are below. And speaking of producers, the Melissa Barrera firing situation, of course, illuminated the political stance of Scream's executive producers and funders. But even before this, there was already an issue hidden in plain sight that I think contributed to the monotony of the Scream franchise. As you may have noted as I listed each film's writer-director, is that not a single one of the films in this 7-film franchise has been written or directed by anyone other than white men. And this distills one of the main barriers for entry into the film industry. That studios are run by specific groups of men that invite other similar men into the fold to do the work and get the money. When people talk about boys' clubs in workplaces, it's not a dismissive statement, but it's an earnest summary of the way that people in positions of power, like executive producers in the film industry, will favor people they relate to, see themselves in, or have a personal investment in supporting, like a friend or family member. Opportunities are handed under various guises to the same kinds of people again and again. And truly, the only way to see progress in this industry is for those people at the top to shake up who they open these doors to. Major shout out to Danny Boyle for passing his beloved 28 Days franchise on to Nia DaCosta to direct The Bone Temple, which was a massive hit critically and commercially in her hands. I know that there have only been 3 more men I know that there have only been 3 more men writing and directing Scream outside of Wes Craven and Kevin Williamson, but it's disappointing that in a 30-year run with multiple opportunities to reassign these roles, the head honchos at the Weinstein Company and Spyglass left women, black people, Asian people, queer people, basically everyone else out in the cold. It's especially maddening here in a franchise where the first and most beloved entries were written by a gay man, Kevin Williamson, in a time where gay men also had limited opportunities. To not learn from that different perspectives can have groundbreaking outcomes is so disappointing. And for utmost clarity, I'm not suggesting that other voices are needed to bring politics or activism to Scream. Frankly, we don't exist just to make art about oppression and shouldn't only have value when studios decide it is time to make a feminist film or a slavery film. All I mean to say here is that in such a tired franchise, a new set of eyes could bring it all to life. This is the outro. I'm actually melting. So, I fully recognise that pivoting to a version of Scream that satirises elevated and post-elevated horror and popular tropes like good guy villains would be so jarring and more than likely receive crazy backlash for dashing the spirit of the original franchise. That said, it's not really on my wish list, though I do wish, retrospectively, that this had been the direction the franchise had been taken, for me personally. Realistically, where I think change should happen to revive the series without upending it is behind the scenes, as explained. As of March this year, this male-only lineup has finally added 2 female faces, with the sister duo behind Poker Face, Lila and Nora Zuckerman, set to write and direct the 8th film. And while I'm glad to see this shift finally happen, at this point it's unlikely that I will rush to see another Scream film given the executive treatment of Barrera, the collaborations with Meta AI, which we didn't even touch on in this video, and my general fatigue with the series ethos. Which brings me to one final point I'm left to make. Not about the creators of Scream, but about us and how we consume it. I mentioned earlier that Craven and Williamson, in making Scream the First, recognised that audiences had grown cynical and overfamiliar and were smart enough to need more. And all in all, I think that's what Scream 7 and the franchise on a whole now lacks. Overfamiliarity with Scream has led to exponentially decreasing enjoyment, and we are not, as the audience, being treated by studios as intelligent and discerning consumers. We're being treated like idiots who will eat from the same ghost face-shaped slop bucket until we can feed no more. And if we keep going to see the Scream franchise in cinemas, we are telling the studio that we are okay with that. So, that is Scream, the self-cannibalizing franchise that went from joyful and on-point deconstruction of contemporary horror tropes to repetitive regurgitations of its own plot points and cliches. As negative as this video may have sounded, I absolutely adore this series, and bar 7, I would watch any of them with a giddy smile at the drop of a hat. And I hope that this video has only added to your relationship with these films. I have been Girl on Film, which is where you can find me on Patreon if you would like to support what I do and get involved with my community. And you can find me pretty much everywhere else at rachellydiab. Have a beautiful week. XOXO. Ghostface. Boo!